Oké, dus dames en heren, welkom aan deze persconferentie. Ik ben heel blij om hier te zijn en heel blij om over iets anders dan onze relanceplan te spreken. Ik zal de kleine inleiding doen in het Engels, maar wij kunnen alle vragen in het Nederlands antwoorden. Mesdames et messieurs, je suis ravi d'être avec vous ce matin et de parler de cette campagne passionnante de recrutement pour les prochains astronautes. La présentation se fera en anglais, mais on peut bien évidemment prendre toutes les questions en français par après. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to welcome you to this joint session together with the European Astronaut Center, led by my colleague Frank de Winne, and the administration of BELSPO, the Federal Administration for Scientific Policy, in order to highlight the campaign for the selection of the new European astronauts. But also, it's a special day to celebrate the 60th birthday of the first human trip in space with Yuri Gagarin. And also, it's less known, the 20th anniversary of uninterrupted human presence in space. It's quite special to know that actually for 20 years now there has been, without any break, human presence in space aboard the International Space Station. Dus as you know, and my colleagues will talk in much more detail about this campaign, there is currently a call led by the European Space Agency to recruit new astronauts, and we thought it would be very much needed to make it visible and to encourage Belgian people to apply. And as the Secretary of State responsible for space research, I would be extremely thrilled to have the opportunity to support a future Belgian astronaut. So let me tell you a few words about the importance of human space exploration for Belgium. As you may know, Belgium has been supporting the exploration programs of the European Space Agency for several decades. As one of the only 10 member states to have signed the international agreements for the International Space Station, Belgium indicated human space exploration as a key point for its space exploration strategy. Most people, even in Belgium, don't know it, but Belgium is actually considered in Europe as the biggest of the small country in space exploration. At the last Council of ESA in 2019, Belgium has decided to remain a strong contributor to the ESA exploration program. Belgium has even increased its contribution to the European Space Agency by 20%. This is significant, and this government has taken a firm commitment not to reduce its contribution within the next term, still 2024. So the question you may have is, why the hell does a small country like Belgium invest in space exploration? Shouldn't we let the job being done by the big countries like the US, like China, or even France or Germany in Europe? And actually, we believe it's very important for different reasons. The first one is that it's in the Belgian DNA to explore, to push boundaries, and to innovate. With plans to push human presence from low Earth orbit towards deep space, we have very exciting times ahead of us in the next decades, with projects like having a permanent basis on the Moon and further exploration to Mars. I believe, and this is more of a philosophical comment, if I may, that actually space is the new frontier. And I believe that human beings are dreaming animals. Animals, actually one of the few species, if not the only one, of animals who are dreaming. And we need to dream, especially in the difficult context of COVID-19. We need to dream about new conquest. We need to dream about big projects that moves humanity forward. And space conquest is definitely one of these big dreams that can push humanity forward. A second reason is inspiration. inspiring people, especially the younger generation, is an important role of space exploration. We all have in mind the iconic images of the first humans on the moons, and these have been inspirations for many people around the globe to pursue a career in science or engineering. In Belgium, with the flights of Dirk Vermoet in the 90s, but also more recently with Frank de Winne and its two missions in space, we also witness an increase in the participation of Belgian scientists in experiments on the international space stations. And these experiments have led to the establishment of multiple research groups involved in space research all over Belgium, in Brussels, in Flanders, and in Wallonia. And many of these research centers actually have developed a very deep expertise in domains that do not only feed space research, but also have application on everyday life of people on Earth. However, what we observe is that many of our excellent scientists involved in space research have retired or will retire in the coming years. So if we want to maintain our level of excellence, if we want to maintain our position in the space research and in the space industry, we must continue our investment in human capital. And that's one of the reasons why we do this press conference today. It's with the objective to stimulate people, men, but especially women, to pursue a scientific career in a field related to space. As you may know, it's a real challenge in Belgium actually to attract young people to scientific career. We have in Belgium 15 science graduates out of 1,000 people. It's way below the European average, which is about 20, and way below top countries like Germany, who has about 35 graduates per 1,000 inhabitants in their country. So it's we have no rationale for this, and it's also a very much a challenge for women actually to get into a career of excellence in the field of science. There are no, I would say, logic evidence to it, and that's why we need to promote science among the young generation, and especially among the younger female generation. Let me come back quickly to the astronauts, who are probably the best ambassadors for this message. And as children, most of us, including me, we all have been fascinated by the story of Tintin, Objectif Lune, On a marché sur la Lune, actually drawn several years before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And in the same way, we were inspired by Frank de Winne, by Dirk Vermoet, and I'm very proud to sit next to you and sit to excellent scientific researchers. And it's a key in our message for the next generation of astronauts is to keep on inspiring us, inspiring the research and inspiring the excellence of Belgium in those fields. So we hope to have many Belgian candidates in the recruitment process, and it will be a very good first step to having a new astronaut with a Belgian passport. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you very much, Monsieur le Secrétaire d'État. Welcome everybody as well. I'm going to lead you a little bit more into the process of the astronaut selection that will take place over the next, I would say, year and a half from now. But maybe first, in order to stimulate a little bit your mind, I have a little video for you.
I want to build a rocket and send it to the stars. I want to become a better steward of planet Earth. I want to defend our home against dangers from outer space. I want to unravel the mysteries of the universe and our place within it. I want to share our great discoveries with the world. I want to be part of something big, a meaningful project on a global scale. I applied to become an astronaut. Why not you? We look up at the night sky and wonder who we are and where we come from. What if the answers were within reach? The European Space Agency cares for your dreams and works every day to turn small steps into giant leaps. Ready to join the crew?
So, of course, we will do a new astronaut selection, but first I would like to give you a little bit the context why we are doing that. As the Secrétaire d'État has told you, there is a new emphasis on space exploration a little bit all over the world. Our colleagues from NASA, of course, they have announced the Artemis program to bring a man and a woman to the South Pole of the Moon. There is also our colleagues from China, from Russia, that are working on that. And with the European Space Agency, we are, of course, participating in those endeavors and in international cooperation. The decision, as the minister said in 2019 of the ministers at the ESA Council to substantially increase the effort in space exploration by 20-25%, which was also done by Belgium, for which we are at ESA very grateful, has of course led that we can also start on new programs. You can see here today what we are doing with astronauts is flying on the International Space Station, very close to our planet, where we do excellent research. I'm very glad that Angelique is here, one of our brilliant young Belgian researchers who actually did research on myself when I was still an astronaut, and is now leading the human life science experiments in ESA as a colleague of mine. So we were all focused on the International Space Station for about 10 to 20 years. And we will continue to do that for the next 10 years because politically we have taken the decision that we will extend the space station till 2030. Also, our partners are moving in that direction. And so the new young astronauts that we will recruit, of course, their first destination will be the International Space Station. But we are not stopping there. We also have an extensive lunar exploration program. It's one of the other destinations of the ESA, the European Space Agency Exploration Program, with first of all the Gateway. The Gateway is a program that has been decided in 2019 that we will execute together with our colleagues from NASA, from Canada and from Japan, and to which ESA will participate with, as you can see here, IHAB and Esprit. 2 of the 4 modules of the Gateway will be built here and are contribution by Europe. So you see we have 50% of the modules in the Gateway. And we will also fly to the Gateway on the Orion vehicle. The Orion vehicle is the spacecraft that NASA is developing to fly to the moon. The service module of that vehicle, where the engines are, where the solar power arrays are, where the oxygen tanks are, is being built in Europe and is a contribution of Europe. And as part of our contribution, we will have 3 flights of European astronauts to the Gateway in the next 5 to 10 years. So that will be the first Europeans that will fly further away from our planet than the International Space Station, and it will fly to the moon. Most likely this flight will still be performed by the people that were recruited in 2009, but maybe some of the younger people might already go there. But that's not the end. We are preparing for the next ministerial conference in 2022, where again we want to make a significant step. Our destination in Europe is not the gateway by itself, but it's the lunar surface. We want to do sustainable exploration of the lunar surface. And one of the proposals that our space agency is going to make is to see if we can participate with NASA in the Artemis program on the lunar surface exploration, and of course then also have European astronauts that not only will fly towards the moon, but that will also walk on the moon. And that's certainly an objective that we have in the next 10 years by 2030. And then, of course, further away, we have Mars. Mars today is a robotic exploration program, but it's also very important. We have also decided in the conference in 2019 to participate together with NASA on the Mars sample return mission that you can see here on the right. Basically, we are going to bring 300 grams of Martian soil back to the planet. And there are a number of firsts there as well for Europe. We will have the sample fetch rover. So the Mars lander Perseverance that has landed recently is already collecting samples on the Martian surface. He's leaving this behind in little tubes, and then ESA will build a small rover that will go and collect all those little tubes and bring them back to a rocket that will launch from Martian soil back to orbit. And then you see there the Earth Return Orbiter is a spacecraft that ESA will build and launch, fly to Mars, grab those samples in around the orbit in Earth, and then come back to Earth. So it's the first spacecraft ever that will have traveled to Mars and come back. And that's also an ESA contribution. So as you see, ESA is on the forefront of exploration today, but we want to even make it better. And of course, in order to do that, we need the next generation of astronauts. And this is why we have decided to do this call now. So who can apply to become an astronaut? Well, we are still looking for scientists, engineers, mathematicians, people in computer sciences. So because the astronauts that fly to the space station today or to the gateway tomorrow or to the lunar surface are people that will execute science, that need to understand complex systems, that need to operate complex systems. So that is why we require people to have a master's degree in any of these fields. How do the other requirements? Of course, you need to be a citizen of an ESA member state. It's an ESA program. The master's degrees, we talked about it. We also want the people to have already some professional experience, of course, because we want to select people that have been successful in their early careers. And of course, that also requires that they have done some work. English is a spoken language that we have in space today, mostly. But not only English, we also require people to have knowledge of a second language, because tomorrow, if you fly to the space station, or today if you fly to the space station, people will need to learn Russian. If we want to work with our Chinese colleagues, which we're also looking at, and fly to the Chinese space station, people might need to learn Chinese. We have already 3 astronauts today in the European Astronaut Corps that are starting Chinese courses. Of course, you need to be well motivated. There are irregular working hours. You're a long time away from home. You need to be flexible where you work, because it can be in the US, it can be in Russia, it can be in Europe. Sometimes there is pressure when you fly to space. I can tell you, if you sit on top of a rocket and you don't feel a little bit of pressure before you launch to space, you probably don't know what you're doing. So you need to be able to deal with that. And of course, as I said, we are also subjects ourselves, guinea pigs, for the science that Angelique wants to do with us. So you need to be willing to participate in Angelique's proposals. The selection process, today we are receiving the applications. They are open till the 28th of March. And basically then we go into a kind of a funnel where we expect maybe between 10 and 20,000 applications, if not more. In the 2009 selection where there were less ESA member states and where there was not so much emphasis on exploration and not the prospect to fly to the moon. We had 10,000 candidates, so we expect more this time. And so, of course, how do you narrow down 10,000 candidates or 20,000 candidates to 4? So you need to gradually go to less and less candidates. So the first part is the screening on the dossier that the people need to prepare. Then there are a number of psychological test series that we will do in some institutes to see if the people have the psychological and psychometric aptitudes to fly to space. This is then also happening in January to April. Finally, people need to be healthy, of course. So there is a medical selection ongoing in May to July 2022. And those who are still remaining at that moment will have a round of interview at the European Astronaut Center with the operational people, for example, myself. And then there will be a second round of interview that will be done at the level of the Director General of ESA, that then will finally make an appointment and an announcement, which we hope to happen in October 2022. So how to apply? There is the ESA website, www.esa.int. There is this nice banner there. You can see Become an Astronaut Now. If you click there, you find an Apply Here button, and it will take you to the website where you have to do the things that are quite obvious, I think. You need to complete a questionnaire that is there. First of all, create an account, and then complete a questionnaire. Upload your CV, a motivation letter, so the standard things that you all otherwise have in other applications. We also do a first in Europe. Exploration is not only about going further, it's also about doing new things. One of the things we want to do new in the European Space Agency is to see if we can fly people with physical disabilities. Today, this is not possible because the spacecraft are not adapted to people with physical disabilities, but we want to start a feasibility project. Can we adapt the space vehicle? Can we have people with some physical disabilities that can be professional astronauts? So apart from their physical disability, they should have all the qualifications as any other astronaut that will be selected, meaning the scientific degrees, the psychometrical aptitude, and so on. And so the disabilities we are looking for is people of short stature, people that have a leg amputated or missing under the knee, or with some significant leg difference, for example, because of birth. So that is a little bit about the selection process, what we are looking for, and the timeline. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions, of course, after the press conference. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today and also to give you a little bit of background on why space is such a peculiar environment for human beings to be in, which is, of course, very relevant for future astronauts to consider. What happens to the human body in space, and in particular also the research that the European Space Agency does to keep our astronauts as healthy as possible. So my colleague Frank de Winne has already indicated the plans of ESA to go, let's say, beyond the International Space Station on again to the Moon and eventually also onto Mars. Now, as I already mentioned, space is quite a hostile environment for human beings. And I probably don't need to tell you that even if you're not an expert, you can consider that space is quite difficult because, of course, human beings and in essence all life on Earth has really been made biologically also to function here on Earth. So as soon as we go away, let's say from our home planet, there are certain risk factors that can impact the function and performance of biological systems and in particular also of humans. When we consider risk factors of space, we think of microgravity or weightlessness as it is sometimes referred to, and we've already done quite a lot of research on astronauts aboard the International Space Station to better understand what microgravity does to the human body. But there's also other factors to consider. There's, for example, cosmic radiation, which can be quite a showstopper, especially when we're considering longer duration missions further away from Earth. There's isolation and confinement, which are, of course, psychological aspects that we need to consider for astronauts and which are also important. And when we consider missions to the moon, for example, and definitely missions to Mars, the crew will need to be more autonomous. There can be no rescue operations. The distance from Earth will be bigger. There might be communication delays and so on. So these are, of course, a lot of risk factors, and that's why we also do research at the European Space Agency to better understand what these risk factors do to the astronauts, so we can also try to mitigate and minimize these effects. Now, what happens to the body in space? I'm just going to walk you through it very high level. I'm happy to answer any questions also afterwards, should you have any. But we already know from the 2 decades of International Space Station research that there's quite a lot that happens in the human body. And I already want to emphasize from the beginning that not all these changes are necessarily bad. It is needed that when you put a human in space, as I mentioned, it's an extreme environment, so they need to adapt to function as good as possible in that new environment. We know that there are brain changes, and we know that there are ocular changes, meaning that the vision of astronauts can degrade when they spend a long time in space, and this is related to the fact that the fluids in the body will be distributed differently when you go into a microgravity environment. From the research, and I've been involved in this research myself, we don't know how this changes when the astronauts come back to Earth and how this will adapt. Maybe it goes back to the way that it was before, maybe it stays like that. So of course, when we consider future missions, this is something that we need to understand very well. We can have respiratory issues, so lung health problems, and especially when we consider missions to Moon and Mars, where there is a lot of dust present, we also need to understand what that does to the lungs of the astronauts there. There can be cardiovascular problems. The heart is a muscle, and when there is microgravity, the muscle will need to work less, which means that it will become weaker. This is not an issue in space, but especially when astronauts return, the heart will still be weakened, so this might cause some issues, especially the first days after returning to Earth. There's kidney stones, or a higher risk of kidney stones. This seems relatively trivial on Earth, but when you consider that astronauts can be on Mars where there's no, let's say, capabilities of returning them, this can become a medical issue. So this is also something we need to better understand. There's muscle atrophy because, again, there is no gravity, there's no gravity working in on the body in space. So astronauts actually exercise really frequently, 2 to 3 hours a day, to try and avoid this muscle atrophy. And we see this muscle disuse, especially in the lower extremities, so in the legs of the astronauts. And there's also bone demineralization, which can give a higher risk of bone fragility and bone fractures. And also this, of course, we want to avoid when going into space. There's a lot of other things. The immune system can be affected. There's sleep disturbances. As I already mentioned, there's radiation exposure. The nutrition and the metabolism will be different, and so on. Again, I want to emphasize that I do not want to scare away any future astronauts of applying. These are all things that we already understand quite well and that we have good countermeasures for. I just want to mention it so that you are aware of what happens. And I also want to emphasize that human beings are very capable of adapting to an extreme environment. And this is also what you see in astronauts. We can send humans to space for 6 months, for 1 year, and they can still function at a very high level. Of course, when we go to...
They can also function when they come back.
Exactly. So, of course, we want to understand what happens because we want to minimize any negative effects as much as possible, especially when we consider longer duration missions to Mars, to the Moon, and so on. We just want to make sure that we fully understand what happens to keep the astronauts as healthy during their mission and also when they return back to Earth. So ESA has a large human research program, so life sciences program, aboard the ISS, aboard the International Space Station, and that's also why our astronauts are so important for us, because of course they are important guinea pigs for our research. And we do research in a variety of fields where we look, for example, at the heart, at the immune system, muscles and bones, how aging is affected in space, and so on. And I was also very lucky to be part of one of these research experiments myself, where we looked at how the brain changes in space. Now, what is often not known is that we also do a lot of research here on Earth, which can help us to make important translations to prepare astronauts better, but that can also help us to, let's say, improve the medicine that we do here on Earth, and that certain patient groups here on Earth can also benefit from it. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these platforms. I just want to give you an overview so that you have a little bit of an understanding. So we do, for example, yearly, we do 2 to 3 parabolic flight campaigns. Parabolic flight is just a regular plane that flies a very specific flight profile that allows us to do research in microgravity or in different gravitational situations. And this is actually the only means that we have here on Earth to test in microgravity when we consider human beings. So for us, this is very important. And it also helps us to prepare, for example, bigger experiments before they fly on the International Space Station. We also have research that we do here on Earth that simulates certain aspects of spaceflight. For example, we do Bedrest studies, and as the name already indicates, we put people in bed for a long period of time because we can simulate certain aspects that really look to what astronauts are experiencing in Earth. For example, we will have more fluid going to the upper part of the body, and there we will also see changes in the muscles and the bones. So we can use these models not only to help prepare our astronauts, but also to learn very valuable lessons for patients here on Earth. Think of an elderly population, think of patients that are immobile for a very long time, or bedridden patients. And this, of course, also is important when we consider the current health pandemic that we have ongoing. As I already mentioned, there are also psychological aspects that we need to consider, especially, again, when we think of longer missions that are further away from Earth. So we also do a lot of research into the psychological aspects of spaceflight. We work together with the research station Concordia, as you can see depicted here, on the Antarctic continent. It's a very isolated, confined, and extreme environment, so this is really a high-fidelity situation to help us to get a better understanding of how astronauts cope with, for example, when they are on mission. And we also do isolation studies that are more, let's say, a simulation where we mimic, for example, a lunar mission or a Martian mission. For example, we will collaborate with our colleagues from Russia and from NASA later this year, where we will have an 8-month isolation study. So we will have 6 participants being locked away, as we can say it like that. They will pretend to fully follow the mission scenario of a lunar mission. And of course, for us, this also yields very important insights. I already mentioned it, but there are a lot of benefits of spaceflight. As I mentioned, ESA does a lot of life sciences research on the astronauts, but also on platforms here on Earth. Of course, these help us to better prepare the missions that we have in front of us. And again, it helps us to keep the astronauts as healthy as possible. It also helps us to get a better fundamental understanding of certain biological processes, which of course can also be beneficial for patients here on Earth. And these can have, as I mentioned, applications for terrestrial medicine, but also for industry. And this is also important to consider. Just to give you some examples, we have done research that has helped us to better understand how patients cope, for example, with brain trauma here on Earth. We've done research, as I mentioned, that is directly applicable to elderly, for example, to understand how we can avoid any muscle disuse of elderly people that have to spend long periods in bed. There have been, for example, bacteria that have been suggested to the astronauts to grow as food aboard the station, which have shown that they can decrease cholesterol, which of course can also have a lot of applications here on Earth. And these are just some examples. Another example that is more in the industry, but also for medicine, is that, of course, when we consider these future missions, we need to make sure that we can help our astronauts remotely. So we need to have remote techniques for diagnostics and also for telemedicine. And of course, this can also be applied here on Earth and have a large span as well. This is my last slide. Of course, today is a very special day. It's been 60 years since Yuri Gagarin, as the first man and human, went into space. And of course, after him, many men and women have followed in his footsteps. We're very happy to recruit new astronauts, and these new astronauts will be very important to push the European space program forward, to get a better understanding and to really move forward onto the moon and eventually onto Mars. We want to focus in particular also to include women, because this is very important for us. And also as a scientist, I can also speak to that, because we need more women to fully understand how women react also to the peculiar environment of space. And it is my pleasure also to, in this regard, announce that one of my colleagues, the ESA astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, also has a message to, in particular, also speak to the women interest applicants. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Samantha Cristoforetti, Italian astronaut of the European Space Agency. If you have ever dreamt of flying to space, this is the time to fulfill your dream. For the first time in over 10 years, the European Space Agency is looking for new astronauts. Now, I can tell you, this is a dream job. For me, it's been the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, and it's been everything that I could hope for. It brings together many of my passions, science and technology, and flying complex machines, and working in complex operational environments, and working together with international crews, speaking different languages, and of course, once in a while, you get to actually fly a rocket to space, work up there on the International Space Station, looking down on our beautiful Earth beneath. And for you guys thinking about maybe applying this time, you have something even more exciting to look forward. Your first missions will probably be on the International Space Station, but maybe a second mission or a third mission might even be on the moon. So I really encourage you to apply. As long as you have the minimum qualifications, you have a background in engineering or science or medicine, or maybe you're a pilot or a test pilot, please go ahead and apply. And I am especially reaching out to you young ladies out there. Please do not tell yourself you're not good enough. Sometimes we women tend to do that, but please don't do that. Come on, apply, send your applications, and let us be the judge. It's exciting times ahead in space exploration, and I hope you will be part of our team.
If there are any questions by the press in the room, please raise your hand and state your name and affiliation. Do you have any questions here in the room? I have one. Certainly, you can ask your questions in French, and you can use the microphone in the bench right next to you on the right, normally, so that the live stream audience can also hear it. Can I help? There you go.
Voilà, excusez-moi. Combien de candidats allez-vous prendre, en fait, combien?
La question était combien de candidats est-ce qu'on va recruter entre 4 et 6 candidats dans le corps des astronautes. Mais puisqu'il y a quand même une évolution aussi au niveau des États membres de l'ESA, on n'est plus 10, comme le secrétaire d'État avait mentionné. La Belgique était un des premiers à être partie de la Station spatiale internationale dans la IGA. Aujourd'hui, on est 22, et donc naturellement, tous ces pays ont aussi une aspiration d'avoir leurs astronautes, leurs citoyens voler dans l'espace. On va aussi avoir des astronautes de réserve. Et donc les astronautes de réserve, ils ne seront pas immédiatement recrutés par l'ESA, mais si on a des opportunités de vol supplémentaires, ou si un pays veut acheter un vol ou avoir son citoyen voler dans l'espace, par le biais des astronautes de réserve, on aura aussi cette possibilité de le recruter plus tard et d'avoir une courte carrière à l'ESA comme astronaute, de voler comme astronaute et puis après rentrer dans sa profession dans son pays. Et donc ça c'est un peu le but et on aura on estime entre 10 et 20 astronautes de réserve aussi dans cette sélection. C'est aussi une première.
Question by the lady in the middle of the room. Please go ahead.
Question pour Monsieur Dermine. Est-ce que la Belgique est prête à acheter un vol?
C'est une excellente question, mais qui n'est pas improbable, mais pas à l'ordre du jour.
Je ne sais pas vous demander combien non plus.
Non, c'est quelque chose qui n'est pas discuté aujourd'hui.
Je pense que ce qu'il faut voir, c'est que surtout il y aura beaucoup de vols aussi dans le cadre du programme de l'exploration de l'Agence spatiale européenne. C'est surtout ça qu'on demande aux États membres, c'est de soutenir le programme d'exploration en général. C'est ça le plus important naturellement pour l'ESA et je dois dire que la Belgique a toujours supporté le programme d'exploration aussi dans la ministérielle de 2019 et donc voilà, c'est ça le plus important.
Ce qui fait la force du programme européen, comme Franck l'a mentionné, c'est justement la nature multilatérale de la construction de l'Agence spatiale européenne et en particulier la Belgique en tant que petit pays. On n'a pas l'ambition de pouvoir mener certains efforts spatials dans l'espace tout seul. Et donc c'est pour ça qu'on s'inscrit à pleine force et résolument, et en tant que membre fondateur de l'ESA depuis les années 70, dans cette démarche multilatérale et dans la construction de l'Agence spatiale européenne.
Le prochain rendez-vous est fin 2022 à la ministérielle de l'ESA, la suivante. C'est ce qu'on est déjà en train de préparer avec notre équipe à la politique scientifique.
Le budget actuel de la Belgique pour la conquête spatiale et tout, il est de combien par an ou bien sur 5 ans, c'est combien?
Mais donc chaque année, ce sont des chiffres qui sont publics. La contribution de la Belgique à l'ESA est de l'ordre de 250 millions d'euros par an. C'est une contribution qui a été revue à la hausse de 20% suite à la dernière conférence ministérielle de 2019 et le gouvernement Vivaldi s'est engagé résolument à ne pas diminuer cette contribution tout au long de la législature, donc au moins jusque 2024. Après, et ça je laisse peut-être à Franck ou à mes collègues de BELSPO répondre sur est-ce qu'il y a des ventilations dans l'affectation budgétaire ESA entre les programmes d'exploration spatiale par rapport à d'autres programmes de recherche de l'ESA, ça je ne sais pas.
Oui, donc, merci monsieur le secrétaire d'État. Oui, donc effectivement, le processus de l'ESA fait que tous les 3 ans, il y a un rendez-vous important qui est cette fameuse conférence ministérielle, donc la dernière est en lieu fin 2019. Et dans le cadre et la prochaine étant fin 2022, dans le cadre de la préparation de ces événements importants, c'est tout un exercice que l'on fait effectivement à chaque fois de voir quelle est la répartition la plus adéquate de cette somme dont généralement comment dirais-je, la planification se fait sur 5 ans, donc on peut grosso modo dire que l'on parle d'un budget de 5 fois 250 millions d'euros, 1,250 milliard donc. Et cette répartition est faite évidemment en fonction des opportunités que proposent les programmes de l'ESA, des besoins aussi de nos acteurs en termes de développement technologique et d'opportunités commerciales. Donc c'est un exercice assez complexe avec lequel nous travaillons avec le cabinet Monsieur le secrétaire d'État, je vois Laurence dans la salle. Donc c'est effectivement quelque chose qui se construit sur plus d'1 an de travail, et qui peut varier d'une ministérielle à l'autre, suivant les enjeux, évidemment. Mais effectivement, comme le dit encore Franck, historiquement, la Belgique est très impliquée dans les programmes d'exploration. C'est d'ailleurs la raison pour laquelle on a toujours soutenu les campagnes d'astronautes, et que nous avons jusqu'à présent nos astronautes, et qu'on aimerait bien en avoir un autre. Donc, mais voilà, de là à dire exactement quelle sera la répartition en termes d'efforts sur l'exploration à la prochaine ministérielle, ben ça c'est quelque chose qui doit être décidé dans les mois à venir.
L'appel à candidature a été lancé il y a plus ou moins 15 jours. Depuis le lancement, quelles sont les réponses? Est-ce qu'il y a beaucoup de candidatures? Et est-ce que la Belgique est particulièrement présente dans ces candidatures?
Je suis désolé, mais je peux pas répondre à cette question à ce moment-ci parce que j'ai pas les données, pas parce que on a dit qu'on allait faire un point pour fin avril en mi-course. Donc, j'ai pas regardé les derniers chiffres. Je sais que le premier jour, on avait déjà 145 réponses, mais ok, c'est pas une course pour être le premier à mettre sa candidature. Je pense que les prix sont donnés à la fin.
En tout cas, ce qu'on capte très clairement, c'est qu'il y a de nouveau un appétit pour l'espace. Et je pense que des phénomènes comme suivre les aventures de Elon Musk et de SpaceX aux États-Unis finalement redonne une certaine actualité à la conquête spatiale qui est restée dans notre inconscient comme quelque chose des années 60 et 70. Et donc il y a une réactualisation de cet intérêt pour la conquête spatiale et je trouve ça particulièrement intéressant parce que c'est un des attraits de la conquête spatiale, c'est de finalement projeter l'humanité dans une réalité qui la dépasse. Et donc c'est passionnant de voir, et on le voit très clairement sur nos réseaux sociaux, sur les trucs, etc. C'est voilà, il y a la jeune génération entre guillemets rêve à nouveau d'espace et c'est magnifique.
Et je pense aussi que c'est le fait parce que nos jeunes astronautes, naturellement, comme vous avez voyé Samantha Cristoforetti, Thomas Pesquet qui va voler maintenant, qui va partir le 22 avril à partir de Cape Canaveral, le premier qui va voler avec un véhicule SpaceX. Mais ils sont très actifs aussi sur les canaux sociaux, donc ils ont une autre connectivité vis-à-vis des jeunes que des vieux gars comme moi. Donc je pense que c'est très bien qu'on a une nouvelle jeune génération à appliquer. Mais ce que je veux aussi quand même renforcer, c'est on ne cherche pas uniquement des astronautes à l'Agence spatiale européenne. L'espace, c'est un secteur en croissance. C'est aussi pour ça que la Belgique, d'ailleurs, a mis beaucoup plus d'argent, parce que le secteur industriel est en croissance. Ça crée beaucoup de jobs qui sont high-level, high-value jobs. Donc, c'est un investissement, l'espace est un investissement dans notre tissu industriel. C'est ça qui est très important. Et un tissu industriel qui est axé sur le futur. Et à l'Agence spatiale européenne, on va avoir à peu près 20 ou 25% de nos ingénieurs qui vont aller en retraite dans les 5 à 10 ans à venir, parce qu'on vient justement d'être établi, les ingénieurs, ils étaient recrutés il y a 20-30 ans. Et donc on aura besoin de beaucoup de jeunes femmes, de jeunes hommes à s'investir dans le futur de l'espace, dans un domaine qui a un vrai moteur de croissance. Et donc c'est pour ça que voilà, Angelique ici en est un exemple. Elle a été recrutée quand Angelique il y a 2 ans, 1 an. Et c'est exactement ce genre de personnes, des scientifiques de très haut niveau qui sont très bien vus dans leur société, dans leur network, qui peuvent rejoindre l'Agence spatiale européenne pour contribuer justement à ce futur qu'on a tous devant nous.
Donc la première, c'est il y a au moins 2 Belges qui sont à l'ESA actuellement. Combien y en a-t-il? Et pour donner un petit peu l'envie aux jeunes femmes, je voudrais avoir un petit peu le parcours de Madame Van Ombergen, voir un petit peu par où elle est passée pour arriver à l'ESA.
Je vais répondre en anglais. So before I joined ESA, I did a PhD in medical sciences at the University of Antwerp, and I was lucky enough to already participate in space research. So actually I was also funded by BELSPO today, so they also played an important role in my career. And then I did a postdoc, which means, continuing on my PhD research. And I really enjoyed my being in a scientific career, also as a female, which I think is very needed. And I was lucky enough that I had a lot of female colleagues as well. But then I saw that there was an opportunity to work at the European Space Agency, and of course I just wanted to try my chances, and luckily that worked out well. So I've been at ESA now for a little bit over 2 years, and I really enjoy the multidisciplinary and the international environment, and I hope to be able to contribute also for a long amount of time.
Any more questions?
And the number of le nombre de Belges à l'Agence spatiale européenne, je n'ai pas le nombre total en tête, mais grosso modo, ce qu'on essaye de faire à l'Agence spatiale européenne, c'est qu'il y a une bonne répartition des États en fonction aussi de leur contribution au programme de l'ESA. Et je pense que la Belgique est certainement dans ces zones. Donc on contribue combien à l'ESA aujourd'hui, Pierre? 6% à peu près, c'est ça? À peu près 6%. Donc si on prend qu'on est à peu près 3000 agents à l'ESA, 6%, ça fait à peu près 150 à 200 personnes.
Mais de toute façon, la réponse est simple. Il n'y en a pas assez.
Et ça c'est vrai aussi, oui.
Donc cette campagne ici de recrutement ne vise que les astronautes, ou bien est-ce qu'éventuellement il y a des dossiers qui peuvent être retenus pour un parcours scientifique à l'ESA ou pour une carrière à l'ESA qui ne soit pas d'astronaute? Et deuxième sous-question, les candidats retenus sont assurés de voler ou pas?
Donc pour répondre à la deuxième question, l'Agence spatiale européenne, on a toujours pu faire voler nos astronautes qu'on a recrutés. Donc le processus de recrutement est très long et très dur, mais de l'autre côté, tous les gens qui ont été recrutés ont toujours volé. Donc ça c'est le premier point. Le deuxième point, effectivement, donc les gens qui font le processus de recrutement, pendant ce processus-là aussi, ils vont naturellement connaître l'ESA, ils vont connaître les autres opportunités et on va les encourager aussi de postuler pour des autres postes à l'intérieur de l'ESA dans le cas où ils ne seront pas recrutés. Et je peux te dire que, par exemple, à l'EAC, où je travaille, European Space Agency, j'ai au moins 2 ou 3 personnes qui ont tenté de devenir astronautes en 2009, qui n'ont pas fait la sélection finale, mais qui ont été recrutés après par l'ESA et qui sont maintenant tout à fait satisfaits avec leur job comme scientifique, comme ingénieur, comme opérationnel. Donc effectivement, c'est pas uniquement les astronautes qu'on recherche, comme Pierre dit. On cherche surtout aussi des Belges qui veulent s'investir dans le métier de l'espace. Pas uniquement d'ailleurs à l'ESA, aussi dans l'industrie, parce que c'est un des problèmes aussi de nos industriels qui cherchent des jeunes personnes qui veulent aller travailler dans ce domaine très, pour moi au moins très, très excitant et satisfaisant.
C'est vraiment le message qu'on avait pour aujourd'hui, c'est que les astronautes, c'est la pointe de l'iceberg où finalement ils sont très peu, ils ont un rôle primordial dans les missions, mais aussi un rôle assez iconique. Mais au-delà de ça, il y a le personnel de l'ESA qui est aussi en recherche, il y a l'industrie spatiale en Belgique, c'est une des industries les plus compétitives en Europe. Il y a environ 10 000 personnes qui travaillent de façon directe ou indirecte pour les 100 entreprises qui sont qui participent aux programmes spatiaux de l'ESA. C'est une industrie qui est très importante et très compétitive en Belgique. Et au-delà de ceux qui travaillent aujourd'hui dans l'industrie, il y a aussi tout le rôle d'inspiration et de promotion des filières scientifiques qui aujourd'hui sont insuffisamment peuplées en Belgique et en particulier auprès des jeunes femmes. Donc, il y a effectivement, et on peut se dire, tiens, mais au final, il n'y aura que 4 ou 6 astronautes sur un processus qui est très large, mais il y a vraiment toute une filière et tout un rôle de promotion que cette campagne de recrutement des astronautes vise à donner.
If that is not the case, then we also have been live streaming this event. And we have some questions by potential candidates that we would like to pose the panel. My colleague Tom, if you can go ahead and select some of these questions.
Yeah, first question, is it an advantage to have several European nationalities? What about double nationalities out of Europe?
No, it's not an advantage to have several nationalities. It's sufficient to belong to one of the ESA member states.
Another question, why is there a restriction on height for astronauts? Will this change in the future? If so, does it make sense to apply if you're taller than 190 centimeters?
Yes, so the restrictions that we have for the nominal astronaut selection, I would say, is because the space vehicles, the space hardware is built for those standards. Of course, if you fly today in a commercial airplane, the standards are a lot larger because there are a lot of people that travel. Here we try to minimize the technical and operational cost of our space missions, and in order to do that we set a number of standards that are easily met by the space industry, and of course that means that certain people that fall outside of those standards today cannot fly. And this is one of the parts that we want to do with the Parastronaut feasibility project, is to say, okay, those people certainly do not meet the standards that are required in the current spacecraft. Can we adapt those spacecraft so that they also can fly? In terms of height today, I don't see a push to change this standard in the future, but okay, we never know where we will go.
Yeah, another question. What is your vision on sustainability topics in the coming years, especially focused on space research and, for example, how an astronaut could contribute to it?
And especially how?
How an astronaut could contribute to it.
Well, sustainability is, again, you have to see it in a number of areas. The sustainability of space research and investment in space is because it's an investment. Yeah? It creates jobs, it creates economic activity, it creates benefits for the member states, inspiration, new vocations for science and technology. So that is one. Secondly, a lot of the technology or research that we do, like Angelique says, helps in medical applications. Angelique focused more on the medicine part because that's her background, but we also do a lot of other things. For example, in the space station, we recycle 80 to 90% of the water that we consume. So the circular economy is something that we talk a lot about here on Earth, that is required for fighting climate change. It's something that we will have to apply if we go further along from our planet. If we want to do sustainable exploration of the moon, of course there is no carbon on the moon, there is no oil, there is no gas, and it will be impossible to transport everything from surface Earth to surface moon, because that is just economically not viable. So we will have to do a lot more recycling, green energy. So all those fields have a direct impact on the sustainability of our planet Earth here as well. So again, space is an investment. That is one of the messages that I would like to bring.
Et on a en Belgique des centres vraiment d'excellence, notamment en matière d'observation de la Terre, avec sur le plateau d'Uccle plusieurs institutions fédérales qui dépendent de BELSPO, dont l'Institut Royal d'Aéronomie, qui joue un rôle prépondérant en matière de recherche scientifique sur l'observation de la Terre et notamment l'observation des phénomènes de changement climatique. Et c'est assez essentiel pour faire progresser la connaissance sur ces problématiques liées à la transition. Si vous ne suivez pas Thomas Pesquet, on en a parlé sur les réseaux sociaux, il a vraiment un rôle pédagogique très important sur sa communication depuis l'espace, sur les vulnérabilités de nos écosystèmes, les vulnérabilités de la Terre. Je pense qu'en termes aussi de retour sur investissement pour la cause environnementale, c'est vraiment intéressant.
Je ne pense pas que ça avait été mentionné, mais vous, je pense que vous aviez 39 ans quand vous avez été recruté. Est-ce qu'il y a une limite d'âge ou bien un âge au-delà duquel ça devient plus trop raisonnable de poser sa candidature?
Donc la limite d'âge qu'on a mis dans la sélection, c'est 50 ans. Parce que les astronautes qu'on recrute sont des astronautes de carrière et on veut qu'ils ont quand même la possibilité de faire 2 vols pendant leur carrière, parce que c'est surtout aussi dans le deuxième vol que on peut avoir des fonctions de plus haute responsabilité, comme Thomas Pesquet maintenant aussi, qui va être commandant de la Station spatiale internationale. Tu peux pas devenir commandant lors de ton premier vol, par exemple. Et donc avec le nombre de vols qu'on a, l'entraînement que ça prend quand même au minimum à peu près 10 ans pour effectuer 2 vols, et donc c'est pour ça qu'on a mis l'âge limite de recrutement à 50 ans.
Question from the public. Is the selection procedure kept confidential or open to, for example, media? I'm asking this because many employers would not appreciate to see their employee applying for another position.
Well, I have two answers to this. Of course, I'm a manager myself, yeah, and I have plenty of people now working for me as an astronaut. I did not, but now I do as the head of EAC and the ISS program manager. I always encourage the people that work for me to develop themselves and to grow and to find new opportunities. So I would really deplore if managers would not encourage their people that work for them to apply and even to help them and to see how they could promote their people to grow. That is one, but that's a very personal statement, and I always do this in the center. Of course, it brings some difficulties because then you have an excellent person and you need to replace him. That is clear, but okay, that is life. But to the fundamental part of the question, of course, it's fully confidential. There is no media present at any part of the selection or whatever. The whole selection procedure, as any selection procedure in ESA, because for that it's not different, is fully confidential and fully under GDPR control.
Then a question for Angelique. Are there any gaps in the space research domain that affect human spaceflight that are not addressed currently?
Well, I think a lot of the research that we've been doing has been focused on the microgravity aspect and how that impacts the human body. We know that when we go to the moon or further, that we will also need to consider the other risk factors more and more, like radiation, isolation, confinement, and so on. And as I already briefly alluded to at the end of my presentation, of course, there's definitely a knowledge gap in how, let's say, female astronauts respond to the stressor of space. There is, of course, literature available, but we don't have sufficient literature available. So if we really want to understand and prepare, we really need also to have more female astronauts to understand. And in most cases, male and female will respond in the same way, but we see that in particular, individuals in general respond differently. So we want to test as many different individuals because, of course, that will help us to account for certain individual variability, which is in particular also going to become more and more important for longer missions.
Est-ce qu'on peut avoir une idée du salaire offert aux candidats?
Oui, c'est public. Donc, les salaires des agents qui joignent l'ESA, ils rentrent dans une catégorie ESA A2, A3. Donc, c'est comme tous les ingénieurs. Hein. Un astronaute ne gagne pas plus d'argent qu'un autre agent ESA. Donc, ils vont gagner exactement la même chose qu'Angelique gagne aujourd'hui. Il n'y aura pas de différence dans ce cas-là. Et donc, les salaires pour les agents ESA qui rentrent à l'ESA, ça dépend un peu des sites, de l'ancienneté, varie entre 3 et 4 000 euros par mois. Donc c'est un très bon salaire, mais on ne va pas devenir extrêmement riche en devenir astronaute, ça c'est clair.
Another question from the public. What is the best way to prepare yourself for the selection procedure?
The best way to prepare yourself for the selection procedure is, first of all, to believe in yourself, to be confident. Like Samantha said, don't think that you cannot make it. I can speak from my personal experience as well. I had plenty of people that told me in 1998, when I entered the selection, that I was too young. I was 28 at that moment when I applied to ESA, that as a military pilot I would certainly have no chance, and that anyway this was not for Belgian people, this was only for Germans or French and whatever, I would have no chance at all. and yet I'm sitting here in front of you today. So you have to believe in yourself, you have to believe in your chances, because it's a very honest and open and process where everybody has equal chances. That is one. And secondly, of course, yes, you know that you're going to have medical tests, you're going to know that you are going to have psychometric tests, so try to stay healthy, do a little bit of sports. I'm not the biggest sportsman in the world, everybody in the astronaut world knows that, but still I try to live healthy. Yeah, that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't eat French fries or with some mayonnaise, as a very good Belgian should do, of course, but try to live healthy, try to, when you have to go to the selections, try to be relaxed but well rested as well, and these are the kind of things that I could recommend, and certainly try to be yourself. Yeah, the selection process is so long, there are so many steps, there are so many questionnaires. If you try to lie about who you are or what you can do or what your strengths are or your abilities are, it's gonna show. And that is always much worse than saying, well, about this one, I did the interview as well in 98. I got certain questions, I had no clue what it was about. So I said, well, I have no clue what you're asking me, but if I think from my experience as an engineer, I could reason this or that way. It's much better than to pretend that you know everything, but then you're completely wrong.
One more question. When you are not preparing for a mission, does an astronaut get the opportunity to work on scientific research and/or engineering projects?
Yes, and that's a very good question, actually. Most of the time, astronauts are not preparing for missions and are not flying to space, as Samantha also mentioned in her video. This is a small part of your career. The rest, you're indeed supporting scientific research, you're supporting engineering projects, you're supporting young students that we have at ESA, for example. We have a project called Spaceship ESA, where we have about 20 students that come there for their master thesis. Samantha has been the lead of that group, inspiring the young people, again linking to the message of the Secrétaire d'État that a big part of what we are trying to do is inspire people to invest in scientific careers, because we will need them, not only in space, by the way. If we want to maintain our level of living here in Belgium, in Europe, if we want to be on the front of innovation, we will need to have a lot more people that invest themselves in science, technology, engineering and math, the so-called STEM careers, or now also with art, the STEAM careers. And that's also what we are trying to appeal to do with astronauts.
What is the percentage of people advancing after the first phase of the selection procedure?
I don't know, because I don't know how many people we will have at the first selection step. So that is a question that I'm not able to answer. If we would only have 4, maybe 4, but I think there will be more than 4 people applying.
A question for Angelique. Which side do you prefer to be on the researcher side or on the astronaut side being researched?
I actually enjoy very much the job I do today at ESA, because it allows me to get a, let's say, full bird's perspective on all the different aspects, whereas if you do research yourself, you're of course very niche and focusing on one particular aspect. So for me it is very motivating to try and put all the puzzle pieces together and see the direct application of the research. So I would say that I really enjoyed my research, and I think it's needed to have such a background, but I really enjoy my job today more than being full-time in the lab.
Vous avez beaucoup parlé des femmes et vous appelez les femmes à se présenter. Est-ce qu'on peut supposer que sur les 4 ou 6 candidats, il y a une sorte de discrimination positive en se disant qu'il faudra au moins une femme?
C'est une bonne question aussi. Ça, c'est naturellement les prérogatives du directeur général à la fin de la sélection. Ce que nous, essayons surtout, c'est au début du recrutement, d'avoir le plus de femmes possible. Parce qu'avoir le plus de femmes possible, ça nous aide à avoir le plus de femmes possible qualifiées à la fin. Et donc, vers la fin de la sélection, ce qu'on estime ou ce qu'on espère, c'est d'avoir à peu près 50 personnes de partout d'Europe, des femmes, des hommes, qui sont capables et qui sont tout à fait qualifiés, enfin qualifiés peut-être pas encore parce qu'ils n'ont pas encore l'entraînement, mais qui ont les capacités nécessaires pour devenir astronaute et voler dans l'espace. Et puis après, c'est les interviews du management, et puis après, on va voir ce que le directeur général va décider. Mais je pense que le plus important, c'est d'avoir un grand pool de personnes qui sont capables. Hein. On ne recrute pas 4 personnes parce qu'on ne va que trouver 4 personnes qui sont capables de voler dans l'espace. Je pense que c'est clair. La question qui était, est-ce que tous les astronautes vont voler dans l'espace? Oui, mais on n'a qu'un vol par an aujourd'hui dans l'Agence spatiale européenne, hein, en grosso modo. Donc ça veut dire, si on veut faire voler les nouveaux recrutés 2 fois, ça fait déjà un programme de 8 ans. Quand on en recrute 4. Naturellement, il y en a beaucoup plus de gens qui sont capables de voler dans l'espace et d'être un excellent astronaute. Mais on ne recrute pas des astronautes pour après les laisser au sol et ne les pas faire voler. Ça, ce n'est pas le but. Le but, c'est de recruter des gens qu'on va faire voler. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a limité le nombre de personnes qu'on va recruter à la fin en fonction du nombre de vols qu'on a dans le futur. Et dans les 50, ok, j'espère qu'on va avoir 50 personnes ou la moitié, ce seront des femmes, j'espère.
Let's take one more question from one of the potential candidates.
If you don't meet all requirements, should you still apply so you are maybe selected for another job at ESA?
Well, if you don't meet all the requirements, you should still apply, first of all. Because if you see the whole list of questionnaires that we have put, I don't think that anybody meets all the requirements. Yeah? And that was the same for me when I applied in 1998. I also did not meet all the requirements. But as further as you go on, well, you see where you get with the selection. So by all means, people should apply, and then they can see where they end up. And they can, as already discussed here with another question, certainly it can also help you in future job recruitments with ESA or again in industry, yeah, because I want to join le secrétaire d'État de nouveau. It's very important. It's not only ESA jobs. Huh? Industry needs a lot of qualified people. Huh? And the researchers need a lot of qualified people, and our country needs a lot of qualified people to implement all the programs, not only the exploration program, because the importance is not only exploration. Again, exploration astronauts, as the Secrétaire d'État said, is something that is very visible. It's people that can be there, but they represent a whole community below them. Yeah. And that is important. If you look the space sector that we have, the very competitive space sector that we have in Belgium, in terms of telecommunications, in terms of Earth observation, in terms of applications in Earth observation, that is becoming more and more important. So all the downstream sector, as we call it, because one is the investment in space that the government is making, but then there is a whole downstream sector with commercial applications where the government is not paying, but where the industry is actually providing services to the citizens and to other people. That is very important, and so yes, by all means you should try to apply. I can also maybe just one last little anecdote from myself. Even if you do not make it, because I did the selection in 1998. I was not immediately recruited in 1998. I was in the final list, but I was not recruited at that moment. I was only recruited 8 years later, or 11 years later, in the year 2000. Even that at that moment I was not recruited, and I did not have any guarantee that ever I would be recruited. The fact only to do the whole parcours as they say in French, to be part of this whole evaluation, to learn a lot about yourself. Even that for me was very inspiring and brought me a lot. And indeed, I also applied after this whole selection process because I got even more inspired to some jobs in industry, and I started to be interested more and more in space research and space technology and engineering. So only that, apply, participate in the parcours, and then you see where you end up. I can guarantee you it will be a very, very rewarding exercise.
Thank you. That concludes the press conference for today. I would like to thank all the speakers, State Secretary Thomas Dermine, Frank de Winne, Angelique, and Pierre for their contribution. And thank you all for attending through the webinar online. We wish you the very best of luck, and please apply.